Amidst the screams echoing through the house and the sound of dishes falling downstairs, Emma quietly packed her suitcase, her parents so engrossed in their argument that they didn't realize their daughter was slipping away from their lives. Emma had lived this moment too many times before, every fight ending the same, with bitterness, silence, and nothing changed. But tonight, she was leaving, and the cause was not only the parents' quarrel, but also Michael. Michael's proposal had come quickly during one of their long walks. "Marry me. Let's build something better, together." Emma had hesitated for only a second before nodding. Anything had to be better than staying this house. The memory of her mother's reaction was still fresh. "You're throwing your life away," Elizabeth had shouted, her voice trembling with anger and something that sounded like desperation. "That boy can't offer you anything except empty promises." But Emma had already made up her mind. Their love story had begun in the dusty fields where Emma's college group had volunteered, but what struck her first was how different Michael was from Ryan. Ryan had loved her 1 year ago, but his love was quiet, predictable, like the steady ticking of a clock. With Michael, everything felt alive. He was the first to jump into the work, cracking jokes with the laborers and hauling heavy sacks with an energy that made the long hours seem shorter. By the end of the first day, Michael had gravitated to Emma's side. "You're too quiet," he had teased, his eyes sparkling under the midday sun. "A girl like you must have plenty of thoughts worth sharing." Emma had blushed, something Ryan had never made her do, and smiled back, feeling a warmth she couldn't name. Michael's presence was like sunlight breaking through clouds she hadn't realized were there. When Michael invited her to dinner at his family's home, Emma was surprised by how easily she felt at ease there. His mother, Margaret, greeted her with open arms and a warmth Emma had never known. "You're always welcome here, dear," Margaret had said, clasping Emma's hands. "A good heart like yours belongs in a loving home." Those words gave her the strength to marry Michael. Emma quickly adjusted to her new role, learning to cook meals with Margaret and helping Michael with small projects around the house. She felt, for the first time, like she belonged somewhere. But as the months turned into a year, cracks began to show. Michael, who had once been so attentive and kind, started coming home later and later. At first, it was just a beer after work with friends. Then it was 2 beers, 3. Soon, it became routine for him to stumble through the door smelling of alcohol, his cheerful demeanor replaced by irritability. Emma tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to stress or the adjustment to married life. But it was hard to ignore the way her heart sank every time she heard his uneven footsteps outside, or the way he brushed off her concerns with a shrug and a muttered, "It's nothing, Em. Don't worry so much." Margaret noticed too. One evening, as they folded laundry together, she hesitated before speaking. "Michael's father was the same," she said quietly, her hands stilling over a shirt. "It starts small, but it doesn't stay that way." Emma looked at her, searching for answers, but Margaret only gave her a sad smile. "Just keep your heart open, dear, and be strong." Emma wasn't sure what strength looked like anymore. She had married Michael because she believed in him, in them, but the man she had fallen in love with was slipping away. Michael's drinking began as a weekend habit, but quickly spiraled out of control. Bottles of whiskey replaced morning coffee, and by the afternoon, he was slurring his words and stumbling around the house. Emma would find him asleep on the couch, reeking of alcohol, with overturned beer cans scattered on the floor. Every evening, she cleaned up the mess he left behind, her hands moving mechanically as she piled empty bottles into a trash bag. The once lively conversations they shared over dinner had been replaced by silence, broken only by the sound of Michael's snores. She tried reasoning with him. "Michael, you've got to stop." Her voice cracked, but Michael waved her off, dismissing her concerns with a lazy grin. "It's just a rough patch, Emma. Don't overthink it. The smell of whiskey on his breath lingered long after he walked away. Margaret, Michael's mother, would often visit, trying to mediate the growing tension. Emma, men like Michael, they're stubborn, but he loves you. You just need to give him time, she said, resting a hand on Emma's shoulder. Her tone was firm but gentle. Con fai kien han, chikotinyu mwaku juoch, Michael. Only love can save him. Emma nodded, more out of obligation than belief. Margaret's words felt like an anchor, pulling her deeper into the chaos she wanted to escape. One night, after yet another argument that left Emma in tears, she reached her breaking point. Michael had stumbled home at midnight, his face bruised from a bar fight. "I can't do this anymore," Emma said, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with resolve. "If you don't get your act together, I'm leaving." Michael froze, the haze of alcohol briefly lifting from his mind. "Emma, please," he said, dropping to his knees. Tears streamed down his face as he clung to her hands. "Don't leave. I'll stop. I'll get help. I swear." His desperation was raw, almost convincing. For the first time in months, Emma saw a glimmer of the man she had married. True to his word, Michael stayed sober for a few weeks. He poured his energy into fixing things around the house and even joined Emma for Sunday church services, something he hadn't done in years. Emma started to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild their life together. When she told him she was pregnant, Michael's face lit up with joy. "Matteo," he whispered, placing a hand on her growing belly. "That's what we'll name him. He's going to be strong, just like his mama." Emma smiled, allowing herself to hope again. Michael began talking to the baby every night, sharing stories about the adventures they would have together. For a brief, fragile moment, the future seemed bright. When Matteo was born, Michael held him with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "He's perfect," he said, kissing the top of the baby's head. Emma watched from her hospital bed, her heart swelling with love and relief. Maybe this was the turning point they needed. But deep down, Emma couldn't shake the lingering doubt. The man who stood before her, tender and devoted, was the Michael she had fallen in love with. Yet, the shadow of his addiction lurked just beneath the surface, threatening to unravel everything they had worked so hard to rebuild. As Michael rocked Matteo to sleep that night, Emma whispered a silent prayer. "Please, let this be enough to save us." Matteo was 5, and the world around him was beginning to make more sense. He noticed the slurred words, the unsteady steps, and the sharp smell of alcohol on Michael's breath. What hurt Emma the most was seeing her son flinch every time his father reached for him in a drunken haze. One day, as Matteo played with his toy cars in the backyard, Emma caught Michael sneaking out of the house. She followed him quietly and found him in the shed, guzzling whiskey from a hidden bottle. The sight made her stomach churn. That night, Matteo asked, "Mom, why does Dad act funny?" "He scares me." Emma hugged her son tightly, tears threatening to spill. She knew it was time to leave. The next morning, Emma packed their bags and drove Matteo to her mother's house despite the dissuasion of her husband and mother-in-law. Elizabeth greeted them at the door with folded arms and a sharp glance. "So, you're back?" she said, her tone colder than the winter wind. "Is this about Michael? I told you he wasn't good enough." Emma sighed, trying to hold her ground. "Mom, I just need a safe place for Matteo." "He doesn't need to see what's happening," Elizabeth scoffed. "You only show up when things fall apart. When everything was fine, you didn't even call." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving the door ajar. Matteo clung to Emma's leg, sensing the tension. Over the next few days, Emma struggled to adjust to being back in her childhood home. Elizabeth's judgmental remarks stung, but Emma bit her tongue for Matteo's sake. On the third day, they went to the village market to buy some necessities. As Emma browsed the vegetable stand, Matteo tugged at her arm, pointing to the broken wheel on his toy stroller. "It won't move," he complained. Emma crouched down to inspect it when a familiar voice interrupted. "Need some help with that?" Emma looked up and froze. It was Ryan. His smile was as warm and genuine as she remembered, and for a moment she was 22 again, carefree and in love. "Ryan," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Ryan took the stroller from her hands. "Let me fix it. Looks like the wheel just needs tightening." He pulled a small toolkit from his bag and got to work. Matteo watched him curiously, and Emma found herself unable to look away. "It's been a long time, Emma," Ryan said, glancing up at her. "It has," she replied softly, unsure of what else to say. After fixing the stroller, Ryan offered to help carry their bags. As they walked together, Emma learned he had moved back to the area after his father's passing. He was now running the family hardware store. They reached the pharmacy, and Ryan insisted on waiting outside while Emma bought Matteo's medicine. When they reunited, he handed Matteo a small wooden toy plane. "For the little guy," he said with a grin. Matteo beamed, clutching the gift tightly. "Thank you, Ryan," Emma said, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and unease. His kindness reminded her of the man she once loved, but it also brought back memories she had worked hard to bury. That evening, after putting Matteo to bed, Emma sat on the porch, watching the stars. She thought about Ryan's smile, his easy laughter, and the way he had always made her feel safe. She was lost in thought when the screen door creaked open. "Can't sleep?" Ryan's voice startled her. He stepped outside, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you might need this." Emma took the cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Ryan, You don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted to tell you, I never stopped thinking about you. Not once." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Emma felt her defenses crumbling. The loneliness she had carried for years threatened to consume her. "I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. But Ryan took a step closer. "You don't have to be alone, Emma. You deserve to be happy." In that moment, the weight of her struggles, her disappointments, and her longing overwhelmed her. She leaned into Ryan, and he held her tightly, as if trying to mend the broken pieces of her heart. The next morning, as the first light crept through the window, Emma sat by Matteo's bed, watching him sleep. Guilt gnawed at her, but so did an undeniable sense of relief. She knew she had crossed a line, but for one brief moment, she had felt alive again. Emma sat motionless on the edge of her bed, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. The 2 faint lines on the pregnancy test mocked her, each moment bringing sharper clarity. This child wasn't Michael's. She knew it with a certainty that tightened her chest. Memories of Ryan, his warm gaze, the fleeting embrace, the night she let herself stumble, invaded her mind. Fear clawed at her throat. The next morning, Emma quietly packed her belongings and told Matteo they were going home. "Your father needs us," she said, masking her unease with a soft smile. Matteo, only 5 years old, didn't question her. He simply nodded, grabbing his favorite toy truck as they left her mother's house. When Michael opened the door, the sight of Emma and Matteo standing there brought tears to his eyes. "You came back," he whispered, pulling them into a hug. Emma stiffened but returned his embrace. She decided to play along, to pretend everything was as it should be. The guilt gnawed at her insides, but her resolve remained firm. This secret had to stay buried. Weeks turned into months. Emma forced herself into routines, cleaning, cooking, and laughing at Michael's jokes when necessary. She avoided Ryan's name altogether, even in her private thoughts, As her belly grew, so did Michael's excitement. He painted the spare room a pale yellow, whistling to himself as he worked. Margaret joined in, knitting tiny sweaters and chatting about baby names. Emma smiled when required, but avoided mirrors. She couldn't bear to see the truth staring back at her. The baby came one stormy night in late fall. Clara arrived screaming, her lungs strong and healthy. Michael beamed, holding his daughter for the first time. "She's beautiful, Emma. Just like you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Margaret agreed, her laughter filling the room as she fussed over Clara's tiny hands. But Emma's joy was short-lived. Clara's hair, a soft auburn shade, glinted red under the hospital lights. Her eyes, unmistakably green, mirrored Ryan's. Emma's chest tightened as she watched Michael cradle the baby. How long before someone noticed? Would Margaret remember Ryan's features? Panic rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. At home, Michael embraced fatherhood with renewed vigor. He sang lullabies off-key, woke in the middle of the night for feedings, and insisted on carrying Clara during her daily naps. Matteo adored his sister, showing her his trucks and proudly announcing he was her big brother. Emma played her part, moving through the days as if on autopilot. The smiles, the laughter, they were all rehearsed. Every time Clara's eyes locked onto hers, Emma felt a pang of guilt so deep it threatened to undo her. She couldn't let herself falter. Michael was happy. Matteo was thriving. For their sake, she couldn't risk everything crumbling down. One evening, while Emma was folding laundry, Margaret stopped by unannounced. Clara was cooing in her bassinet, her tiny hands reaching for the sunlight streaming through the window. Margaret bent over the baby, her fingers brushing against Clara's hair. "It's such a lovely shade," she said, absent-mindedly. Then she paused. Emma's breath caught. Margaret turned, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You know, it reminds me of someone. Can't quite put my finger on it, though." Emma forced a laugh, her hands trembling as she folded Matteo's shirt. "Babies change so quickly. She might look completely different in a few months." Margaret nodded, but lingered longer than usual, studying Clara with quiet curiosity. When she finally left, Emma collapsed onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. She had narrowly avoided discovery, but for how long? As the months passed, Emma's relationship with Michael became increasingly strained. He was attentive, doting even, but Emma found herself withdrawing. The love she once felt for him seemed distant, replaced by a cold sense of duty. She convinced herself that staying was for the best, but her heart knew otherwise. One night, as they lay in bed, Michael reached for her hand. "Emma," he began hesitantly, "you've been quiet lately. Are you happy?" Emma's throat tightened. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. She turned to him, forcing a smile. "Of course, Michael. We have a beautiful family. What more could I want?" Michael studied her for a moment before nodding, though doubt flickered in his eyes. Emma rolled onto her side, clutching the blanket tightly, her chest heavy with secrets she couldn't afford to share. Clara's first birthday approached, and the house buzzed with preparations. Michael hung colourful streamers in the kitchen, while Matteo helped bake cupcakes. Margaret arrived early, carrying a carefully wrapped gift and gushing over how quickly the year had flown by. Amid the laughter and celebration, Emma couldn't shake the unease growing inside her. As Clara toddled unsteadily across the living room, her auburn curls bouncing in the sunlight, Emma caught Margaret watching intently. Her stomach churned. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emma sat alone in the living room, staring at Clara's baby book. She traced her fingers over the pages, the guilt weighing heavier with each passing moment. She knew she couldn't keep this up forever, but the thought of the alternative, losing Michael, breaking Matteo's world, exposing Clara to questions she couldn't yet answer, paralyzed her. The truth loomed over her like a storm cloud, threatening to unravel the fragile facade she had worked so hard to maintain. For now, all Emma could do was hold on and hope it would be enough. Clara had just turned 15 when the rash began to spread across her body. At first, it was faint, just small, reddish spots along her arms. Emma thought it was an allergic reaction to something Clara ate or touched. She tried herbal remedies she'd learned from her mother, ointments from the doctor, and even an expensive cream recommended by a distant cousin. But nothing worked. Within weeks, the rash spread to Clara's face, chest, and legs, turning into inflamed patches that made her skin burn and itch. Clara scratched until her skin bled, and Emma could do nothing but watch helplessly. The mornings were the worst. Emma would find Clara sitting on the edge of her bed, crying quietly as she stared at her reflection in the mirror. "I can't go out like this, Mom," Clara said one morning, her voice shaking. "They already look at me like I'm some kind of freak." Emma knelt beside her daughter, gripping her hands tightly. "We'll figure this out. I promise." But Clara didn't look convinced. Soon, the whispers in the village started. "Did you hear about Emma's daughter? Some kind of skin disease," one neighbor murmured loudly enough for Emma to overhear at the market. "Maybe it's contagious." Others claimed it was a curse, punishment for some sin no one could quite name. Clara felt the weight of their stares everywhere she went, and after a particularly humiliating encounter at church, she refused to leave the house entirely. One evening, after overhearing her mother consoling a well-meaning neighbor, Clara stormed into the living room, her face streaked with tears. "I'm not some charity case," she shouted. Before Emma could respond, Clara ran back to her room, slamming the door so hard the house seemed to shudder. Moments later, Emma heard the sound of glass breaking. She found Clara frantically smashing the mirrors in her room with a shoe, her face twisted in a mix of anger and despair. "I don't want to see it anymore, Ma!" Clara screamed. Emma felt like she was drowning. Every night she stayed up searching for answers, calling every doctor she could find, only to be told the same thing. They didn't know what it was. Then, one fateful afternoon, Clara had a severe flare-up while they were outside hanging laundry. She collapsed, her breathing shallow and her face flushed with heat. Emma panicked, unable to carry her daughter back inside. That was when Charlotte appeared. "Let me help," the stranger said, crouching beside Clara. She had a calm but commanding presence, her medical bag slung across her shoulder. "I'm a doctor. I just moved here last week." Emma hesitated, her protective instincts flaring, but Clara's labored breathing left her no choice. "Fine," Emma said reluctantly. Charlotte quickly assessed Clara and helped Emma get her inside. Later, Charlotte explained the potential causes of Clara's condition. "It's not something I can diagnose immediately," she admitted, "but I'd like to help if you'll let me." Emma folded her arms, still unsure. "Why would you?" "You don't even know us," Charlotte smiled faintly. "Because I've seen what happens when people are left to suffer alone. No one deserves that." Emma reluctantly agreed to let Charlotte start treatment. Over the next few weeks, Charlotte visited their home regularly, administering ointments, running tests, and recording Clara's symptoms. Clara, though initially skeptical, started to trust Charlotte after seeing her commitment. But one evening, during a new treatment, Clara suddenly gasped and clutched her throat. Her face turned pale, and her eyes widened in terror. "I can't breathe," she choked out. Emma froze, her heart pounding. "What's happening to her?" "An allergic reaction," Charlotte said quickly, already pulling a syringe from her bag. "We need to act fast." Charlotte administered the injection with precision, her movements steady despite the chaos. Within minutes, Clara's breathing stabilized. Emma sat beside her daughter, holding her tightly while tears streamed down her face. "You saved her," Emma whispered to Charlotte. Charlotte shook her head. We got lucky, but this means we're closer to figuring out what's wrong. For the first time in months, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't fully trust Charlotte yet, but the woman's dedication was undeniable. As Clara rested that night, Emma sat alone in the kitchen, replaying the day's events in her mind. Maybe, just maybe, they had finally found the help they needed. The modest kitchen was quiet, except for the faint hum of Clara's laughter coming from the backyard. Emma and Charlotte sat across from each other at the small wooden table, steam rising from their tea. Charlotte spoke with her usual calm tone, noting how well Clara was recovering. Her confidence was returning along with her health, she said, and it was only a matter of time before the worst was behind them. Emma nodded, holding her mug tightly. She admitted how hopeless things had once seemed, believing Clara might never smile again. Her gratitude was evident, but she struggled to express it in words. Charlotte reassured her, brushing off the need for thanks, reminding Emma that Clara deserved every chance at a full life. Their conversation shifted, and Charlotte hesitated before mentioning Ryan. She revealed how he had once spoken of Emma, how his feelings for her had lingered even after their marriage. Emma froze, guilt and discomfort coursing through her, but Charlotte continued. There was no resentment in her voice, only honesty. She explained that she had accepted Ryan's past, acknowledging his love for Emma while choosing to move forward with him. Emma, overwhelmed, began to confess about Clara, but Charlotte interrupted her firmly. "No," she said, her tone steady. "Clara needs you to be present. She doesn't need the weight of truths she can't understand. Let the past stay where it belongs." Emma was stunned into silence, but found herself nodding. Charlotte's words cut through years of guilt, leaving her with a clarity she hadn't known she needed. It was a rare moment of relief in the heavy tangle of her emotions. In the days that followed, their conversations grew more open. Charlotte shared stories of her own pain, including her struggle with infertility. She admitted that despite dedicating her life to helping children, she had never been able to have her own. Emma listened intently, offering quiet comfort where she could. For the first time, she felt understood, her burden no longer hers alone to carry. Clara, meanwhile, thrived under Charlotte's care. Her skin healed, and with it, her spirit. She began playing with friends again and laughing without reservation. One afternoon, she burst into the kitchen to announce that she might no longer need the ointment. Emma pulled her into a hug, her heart swelling with pride and relief. Charlotte watched from the doorway, her usual calm presence a quiet reminder of everything she had done for Clara and Emma. Though she said little, her actions spoke volumes. For Emma, Charlotte wasn't just a doctor, she was the first real friend she had ever known. Through shared pain and mutual understanding, their bond grew into something unshakable. The months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Emma no longer felt haunted by her past. For the first time, the weight on her chest lifted, replaced by the quiet hope that perhaps she and Clara could finally move forward. Emma parked her car on the gravel driveway of her childhood home. The familiar creak of the front porch welcomed her, but the air felt heavier than usual. Clara, clutching her doll, looked up at her mother, sensing something wasn't quite right. Emma plastered on a smile. "Come on, sweetheart. Grandma's waiting." Elizabeth, Emma's mother, greeted them warmly, but her smile faltered when she pulled Emma aside. "You haven't heard, have you?" Elizabeth's tone was low, as if afraid the walls might overhear. Emma frowned. "Heard what?" The pause before her mother's answer felt like an eternity. "Ryan. He died last week. A train accident." Emma felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. She clutched the edge of the kitchen counter to steady herself. Ryan. Gone. The name echoed in her mind, stirring memories she had buried deep, memories she had no intention of confronting. That night, after tucking Clara into bed, Emma sat alone in the dimly lit living room. Her mother's antique clock ticked steadily, filling the silence. Thoughts of Ryan flooded her mind. The first time they met at the county fair, the stolen kisses behind the barn, the laughter they shared on warm summer nights. It all came rushing back, sharper and more painful than ever. She hadn't said goodbye, hadn't tried to fix what had broken between them. Regret coiled around her heart like a snake. She rubbed her temples, trying to push the thoughts away, but they refused to leave. "You always ran from what scared you, Emma," she whispered to herself. The weight of her choices pressed harder than ever. The next morning, Emma took Clara for a walk around the neighborhood. The once vibrant streets felt eerily quiet, but neighbors greeted them with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. At the corner store, Mrs. Hargrove, who had known Ryan since he was a boy, sighed heavily. Charlotte left town right after it happened. "Poor girl's been through so much," she murmured. Emma's chest tightened. Charlotte, who had given so much to help Clara, now carried her own unbearable loss. The guilt felt suffocating. That evening, Emma sat by the bedroom window with a pen and a piece of paper. Clara's soft breathing was a steady rhythm in the background as Emma began to write. "Dear Ryan, I'm not sure where to start. Maybe I should say I'm sorry, but even that feels like it's not enough. I don't know if you ever knew how much you meant to me. And Clara, I wish you could see her. She's beautiful, strong, and has this spark in her eyes that reminds me of you. I hope you'd be proud of her." Tears blurred her vision, but she kept writing, pouring out the words she could never say in person. She admitted her mistakes, her fear, and how she had let time and pride build a wall between them. She didn't expect forgiveness. The letter was for her, a way to let go of the burden she had carried for so long. When the letter was finished, Emma folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. She didn't know what she'd do with it, maybe burn it, maybe keep it, but for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of peace. The next day, as she and Clara prepared to leave, Elizabeth hugged her tightly. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but probing. Emma nodded, her smile faint but genuine. "Getting there," she replied. As they drove away, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the road ahead. Emma glanced at Clara in the rearview mirror and felt a sliver of hope. She didn't have all the answers, but she was ready to face the questions. Michael hadn't been the same since Margaret passed. At first, he stayed in their room for days, quiet and unreachable, but by the second week, the bottles returned. At first, they were hidden, under the sink, behind the tool shed, but soon, Michael didn't bother hiding anymore. He'd sit in the living room with a glass of whiskey at noon, his eyes heavy, muttering to himself. Emma tried to reason with him. "Michael, please, this isn't what your mother would have wanted." But her words only made him slam the glass down harder. One evening, he staggered into the kitchen, knocking over a chair and yelling at nothing in particular. Clara, holding her math homework, froze in the doorway. The sound of glass shattering snapped her back to her senses. "Clara, go to your room," Emma said quickly, her voice firm. Clara hesitated, but obeyed, clutching her notebook like a shield. As the door shut behind her, Emma turned to Michael. "You're scaring her," she said, her voice trembling. Michael didn't respond. He was already fumbling for another drink. The days that followed were chaotic. Michael's anger flared unpredictably. One moment, he'd sit quietly on the porch, staring at the horizon. The next, he'd be yelling about the things Margaret never got to do, blaming everyone but himself for his pain. One night, he destroyed the coffee table, sending shards of wood and glass across the floor. Emma swept them up in silence, her face pale with exhaustion. Meanwhile, Matteo had stopped calling. It had been months since Emma last heard his voice. She left messages, simple ones. "Just checking in, sweetheart. Hope classes are going well." But there was no response. Emma knew why. The shame of Michael's behavior hung heavy over their family, and Matteo couldn't bear it. Clara, now 15, began to see her father in a new, devastating light. She had grown up hearing stories about Michael's charm and kindness, about the man he once was. But those stories didn't match the man stumbling through their home, reeking of alcohol and rage. One evening, she cornered Emma in the laundry room. "Why don't we leave?" Clara's voice was a mix of anger and desperation. "He doesn't care about us, Mum. He only cares about drinking." Emma folded a shirt, her hands shaking slightly. "It's complicated, Clara. He's still your father, but he's not a father to us anymore." Clara's words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Emma said nothing, but that night, as she lay awake listening to Michael's restless movements downstairs, Clara's words echoed in her mind. The breaking point came when Michael nearly set the house on fire. He had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette, and the couch caught flame. Emma and Clara put it out before it spread, but the damage was done. The burnt fabric and lingering smell of smoke were a constant reminder of how dangerous things had become. The next morning, Emma sat Michael down. He was hungover, his eyes bloodshot, but she didn't care. "Michael, this is it," she said, her voice steady. "If you don't stop drinking, we're leaving. Clara and I will pack our things and go. Matteo is already gone because of this." Michael stared at her, silent for a moment, then laughed bitterly. "Go where? You think you can just walk away?" Emma leaned closer, her gaze unwavering. "Watch me." That was the first time in years she had spoken to him without fear. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Michael's laugh faded as he saw the resolve in her eyes. But Emma didn't wait for his response. She stood and walked out of the room, her shoulders straighter than they'd been in years. For the first time, Emma wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for her children, and she wasn't going to lose. Clara's transformation was undeniable. Once burdened by insecurity and illness, she now carried herself with grace and confidence. Her skin, once scarred by illness, had healed, and with it, her spirit had flourished. Emma observed these changes quietly, often marveling at the resilience of her daughter. Clara had taken to spending hours in front of the mirror, practicing hairstyles or choosing clothes that highlighted her newfound confidence. Her laughter filled the house, a sound Emma had thought she might never hear again. Emma had little time to bask in this joy. Letters from Matteo arrived regularly, each one a reminder of his growing maturity and determination to support his family from afar. Matteo's messages were always thoughtful, brimming with updates about his life in Chicago and punctuated with reassurances about his financial contributions. He worked tirelessly, his resolve fueled by the memories of a troubled childhood. "Ma," he had written recently, "I know I'm far, but I'll make sure you and Clara never have to struggle." Emma kept those letters in a small box on her nightstand, reading them when the weight of the past felt especially heavy. Despite these moments of light, a shadow loomed. Emma received a call from the hospital one evening, and the voice on the other end was grave. Michael's health had deteriorated. His years of drinking had culminated in liver cancer, an illness that left him with little time. Emma's reaction was muted, a mix of numbness and inevitability. She had always known that Michael's path could only end in ruin. The visit to the hospital was solemn. Michael, once a robust and proud man, was now frail and visibly defeated. Emma hardly recognized him. When their eyes met, Michael spoke softly, his words strained by guilt. He apologized, haltingly at first, then in a flood of admissions. He spoke of regrets, of wasted years, of the pain he had caused her and their children. Emma listened, her face unreadable. There was no anger left to express, no forgiveness she could genuinely offer. Yet, she stayed. She sat by his bedside, offering her presence in silence. When he handed her a notebook filled with letters he had written to her, Matteo, and Clara, she accepted it without comment. She wasn't sure she could read his words, but she felt the weight of his need to unburden himself. Michael's final days passed quietly. He chose not to summon Matteo or Clara, feeling that his absence in their lives had already left its mark. Emma honored his decision, though she doubted it was entirely selfless. When the end came, it was both a release and a confirmation of what Emma had long believed. Michael's redemption was something he could never fully achieve, but at least he had sought peace in his last moments. The funeral was simple. Matteo sent flowers, but he didn't attend. His absence spoke volumes, grief expressed in distance rather than presence. Clara stood next to Emma throughout the service, her hand clasping her mother's. Her words afterward were tentative, almost unsure. She admitted that her memories of her father were few, fragmented by his absence and his struggles. Despite this, she expressed hope that he had found peace, a sentiment that lingered with Emma as they walked back to the car. Life after Michael's death was strangely calm. The storms of their past seemed to have subsided, leaving a quiet clarity in their wake. Emma found herself sitting on the porch often, reflecting on the chapters of her life that had led her here. The notebook Michael had left remained unopened on her lap for days, a symbol of a closure she wasn't yet ready to face. One morning, a letter from Matteo arrived, bringing with it a spark of joy. He wrote about his latest project at work and asked about Clara's plans for college. Matteo's success felt like a victory for them all, a testament to the resilience that had carried them through their darkest times. That same day, Clara played outside, her laughter ringing across the yard as if to punctuate the promise of a brighter future. Emma watched her daughter and realized that Clara had become her greatest source of strength. Later that weekend, Matteo surprised them with a visit. The sight of her son stepping out of the car, taller and more self-assured than she remembered, filled Emma with pride. Matteo joined Clara in the yard, where they tossed a frisbee back and forth like they had when they were children. Emma stayed on the porch, observing them with a quiet smile. It was a simple moment, but it held the weight of everything they had endured and survived. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma sat alone for a moment, her thoughts drifting. The notebook was still on the porch beside her, its cover untouched. She didn't need to read Michael's words to understand his regrets. They had been written across the years of their life together. What mattered now was what lay ahead. Clara and Matteo's laughter broke the silence, drawing Emma back to the present. She looked at them, two bright, hopeful figures against the fading light, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The scars of the past would remain, but they no longer defined her. Emma stood and joined her children in the yard, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. They would be okay. Emma knew it wasn't just a fleeting hope. It was a certainty she had fought hard to claim, one she would carry with her into the future.